Hello. Thank you for the organizers, all of them, for really a fascinating half-time already, 2 out of 4 days, on topics that are quite burning. It's a pity somehow that, so some of the topics, there are people here, but for the others, it's not the same people, so the tradition of continuity of the debate is not always kept. But I'm given the task in the space of one presentation of having to handle 2 countries, and therefore I might boycott the conference. I think I'm going to devote this moment to the color gray. In other words, to what looks very light on a black background and very dark on a white background. In the case of France and Italy, in this particular context, have led me to ask myself questions in the last few days and therefore move beyond what I had originally anticipated I would be saying, because I think that what is happening in the extreme right in both countries can be seen either as an aggravation of conflict, or perhaps, if properly understood and if the future proves out right, the beginning, maybe, of some kind of common conversation of national reconciliation. And I say this because this will be the topic for tomorrow. And in my use of France and Italy today, I am thinking of tomorrow's lectures and that war not far from here, which can be seen as a white man's war against a white man, and however, still is a war that is discombobulating our post-war order, and I think one can, in universal terms, still see it as a major turning point, whether one is living in Africa, even because there's no food coming out of the ports of Ukraine, but even more generally. So first of all, thanks to the title of Hijacking Memory and the New Right, I'm spared the fact of having to talk about Marine Le Pen. The Le Pen boutique is 50 years old today, so let us put her aside. I can concentrate instead on the 2 new phenomena, one in France and one in Italy, that I think have to be understood in a deeper sense beyond their shocking comments or identities. I am referring here, of course, to Éric Zemmour's party, Reconquête, and in a different degree, it's very hard to talk about 2 countries at the same time, Giorgia Meloni's Fratelli d'Italia party. And for those of you who may not know, Fratelli d'Italia are the first 2 words of the Italian national anthem. So that already is, it would be like, someone in France saying, allons enfants, as the beginning of a political movement. All right, now, let me first, and this is where I am improvising, because to tell you the truth, I've been looking at this title, Hijacking Holocaust Memory, and coming to the conclusion that there are some countries where the grayness of the World War II moment was such, it's neither horribly guilty Germany nor superficially horribly innocent UK. The grayness of that period is leading us toward a new grayness today. And what does that mean, and what kind of dialogue can come out of that? So I'm beginning to question the very term hijacking with respect at least to France and Italy, and perhaps tomorrow with the other countries to the east. When I think of hijacking, I see a vehicle, plane, train, car, with a pilot on board, passengers perhaps, going somewhere with a destination, and out of nowhere comes a group of people that jump on board, Far West style or terrorist style, grab the vehicle, remove the driver, change destination, and move on towards something else. In other words, they come from the outside and they're hijacking. I'm trying to think of another verb, and it would be hitchhiking. And I think that with respect to France and Italy, the notion of hitchhiking on the Holocaust is more appropriate. And why do I say that? Because in the grayness of the years of the post-war, of the wartime period, there has been rethinking about it, a lot of hitchhiking not just on the basis of extreme rights, but also among the Jewish presences themselves. And why is this important? One of the common elements of France and Italy, before I go briefly into the history, is that, unlike most countries in Western Europe, the number of Jews, really local Jews, that survived is much higher than most people are willing to claim, and certainly American Jews when they talk about French anti-Semitism. 3/4 of the French Jews survived. 75,000 were deported. Very few came back, but there were still more than 330,000 Jews of France, without even talking about the Jews of North Africa that were there. So consequently, one has to understand that speaking about Jews in the Holocaust after the World War II period implies having, as active actors in the conversation, Jews themselves, and not phantom Jews, immigrant Jews, even though we can go into the North African Jews who come back to France. The case in Italy is perhaps even more striking. About 45,000 Jews, some intermarried. 4,500 to 5,000 did not come back out of 7,000 deportees, which means that, oddly enough, there are really a lot of Italian Jews still around and still today. Also, to make a point here about this hijacking, is that you have to see that fascism went on for 16 years, from 1922 to 1938, with Jews in it. Many Jews are perhaps not honorably proud of that, but Jews lived quite well under fascism, unless they were resistant in terms of liberal democracy, who made the step out of the Aventine in 1925 to say no to Mussolini. Jews were important in the fascist system. There were fascist Jews, and no one bothered them. So this is part of the grayness of the Italian story. In 1938 was the turning point with the racial laws. After that, Mussolini removed them from the state functions, but what counts is that they were not tortured. Anti-fascists might be, and many Jews were anti-fascists, but they were there. And we all know that in southern France, under Mussolini's protection, was a place in which the French Jews and other Jews fled to Nice to be protected. So Mussolini himself did not actually do the deportation. Comes 1943, the Germans are fed up with this man who's not very efficient. They do invade, and then, of course, the sbirri, the police and the other groups of the fascists who remain in northern Italy, do perform the job that the French gendarmes did also in Vichy France. Now, why am I stressing this? Because if you're in the extreme right in Italy today, the major mea culpa that had to be given by a right-wing, extreme right-wing group of people was concerning the racial laws of 1938. Their Italians did something horrible to other Italians. And this particular recanting did actually take place across Italy in those words. How did we extirpate from our own country real Italians like us? This is an incredible crime. But were we responsible for the Holocaust? No, you could enter the normal extreme right-wing notion of, yes, it's horrible, we're commemorating, it happened, but with the usual notion of it happened and the usual use of intransitive verbs and passive modes to say exactly, well, we don't really know, it's not us, you know, it happened, and we do remember that all these victims. So from the point of view of strict recanting, the extreme rights of Italy, who have said something horrible happened in 1938, and we are definitely ashamed of it, that moment happened in 2018 for the 80th anniversary. It had already begun in 2008. And there is a feeling of, well, we've understood now. So how did the Jews of Italy get deported? Well, the Germans came into the scene. The Germans deported them. And the Holocaust Museum memorial that, to me, is the most impressive is the one in Milan called Binario 21, which is underneath the train station of Milan, where Jews were taken, where it was built for the postal bags. You know, you would bring in the postal bags, and then there would be a special rotating thing that would lift the wagon into the major tracks of the Milanese huge central station. Then someone had the great idea that this was the way to get the Jews deported without anyone noticing. So instead of mail, they were taken in, put in these wagons, brought upstairs, and no one coming in to travel was told about it, could see it. And the worst thing about this memorial is that you're sitting there and you're hearing the screeching noises of trains right above your head. I cannot think of a more effective place. Not Hyde Park, not here, not there. This is discrete sound, life sound. Now, this memorial says to the horror of the deported Jews, 1943, 1945, which means that it leaves, in a sense, scot-free the period in which the Italians, the fascists, were supposed to be in Spain. Not to mention that starting in 43, half of Italy was liberated already, and that irony of ironies, those that had been sent in exile by Mussolini because they were anti-fascists were all sent to the boondocks of southern Italy, and therefore were among the first to be liberated in southern Italy. See, this is what I'm talking about when I speak about grayness. Now, to Eric Zemmour. Sorry for my being so rapid, given 2 countries and whatever minutes I have. About Eric Zemmour. People can certainly say, this man's crazy, the more self-hating Jew you cannot find. Eric Zemmour's position made it so that in the last presidential election, in the first round, he won 7% of the national vote to Marine Le Pen's 20 other, because she was talking about purchasing power, and he was going on to the notion of besieged France, the real values of France, the meaning of France, and so forth, and producing provocative notions such as 2 key ones in terms of the Jewish understanding of the past. Pétain and Vichy France protected and saved their Jews. There's not one historian who can even begin to claim, although he made mentions of some, I don't know, scholars somewhere in Israel, but whose names I wouldn't remember, and maybe the Israelis here would know. Certainly not major historians. So Pétain protected the Jews, the French Jews. And then, just to throw in another little dart, flèche, as you would say in French, well, we don't really know. Maybe Dreyfus wasn't so innocent, and we will never be able to tell. So with these 2 sentences, it was like divine manna falling on the extreme right of France. Finally, a Jew, a self-proclaimed Jew, bar mitzvah, going to the synagogue, is telling us the truth no Jew would ever tell us. Maybe Dreyfus was not so innocent, and Pétain, the straight, clear notion, cut notion of what Vichy years were about, well, he defended the Jews, and he would put himself in the situation as being the anvil, whereas de Gaulle was the famous hammer, which was the clear extreme right-wing understanding of Vichy France during Vichy France and even after. Consequently, what is Zemmour trying to do? And more important from our point of view is 54%, please do remember that line, of the French Jews in Israel voted for him. 7% in France, all told, 54%. So you can say, well, they don't understand anything. More important, and in terms of reconciliation and wondering where the Holocaust goes in the future, they were perhaps North African Jews, they were scared Jews, they had a huge enemy, which is Islamofascism, or Islam. And this kind of huge enemy makes it so that somewhere Jews in France are able to side with an extreme right that stood at the very opposite of everything that Jews had or lived in the French context. Now, what does this mean? Who's hitchhiking with whom? Hitchhiking, you take a car, someone's driving and they're going somewhere, and you might just say, hey, I'm going there halfway, please take me and then I'll get off. And I don't know where the car is going, nor do I really much care, unless there's violence in America or somewhere. But the hitchhiking, you go in and off at will. And the hitchhiking with respect to the Holocaust, frankly, and this is where the grayness is important, began immediately. The hitchhiking of the Holocaust through the resistance in which many Jews played major roles took it to the point where anybody who talked about being Jewish in Italy, in post-war Italy, but also in France, it was under the label of the resistance. And the communist resistance spoke very little about the immigrant groups who were so courageous in Paris and elsewhere, the main-d'oeuvre immigrée, who were composed of Jews, but also Armenians, who did all the bloody work in trying to sabotage. Unmentioned, they were not French communists. So the hitchhiking is an old story. And when you have a gray story, because you can see that in 1940, Vichy France, when it happened, many Jews accepted the fact that the venerable Maréchal Pétain had to have a government and had to rule. Many Jews were still on that side. And then the cutting off point was 1942, when one became subservient to the German Nazi decisions. However, historians have shown that in 1941, Maréchal Pétain had already written the racial laws, came out and saying, come on, let's stop this notion that Vichy protected the French. They even imprisoned the elites of France who were Jewish, impeccable croix de guerre from World War I. Still, in the mental universe, and this is where it becomes so dangerous, in the mental universe of this thing, you have a situation in which, well, maybe Vichy France, and more to the point, today, in 2022, I wouldn't say let bygones be bygones. It's a very strong statement here. But given the Islamofascism, a word that was just quoted by Alain Finkielkraut in the interview in Le Figaro, I think 5 days ago, if fascism and Islamofascism and the Muslims are so dangerous, well, look, they're not going to destroy us again. They're not going to put us into trains again, these extreme right-wingers. Maybe we have more in common with them. Hence the notion that, as Zemmour will say, not only civilization is on the side, but he's not even trying to talk about Judeo-Christian civilization, which is a kind of alibi to keep the Muslims out. He's gone back straight to Christian civilization. And in this echoes even something that once Marine Le Pen said, surely the Jews will be kind enough for the general interest to remove the kippah, because we're trying to get rid of the veil. So the least they can do as patriotic Jews is to confirm. Now, what do I imply with this? It can go two ways. This kind of Zemmourian understanding of coming together in a national reconciliation around really right-wing France is certainly not an ideal of how to go about it, and may provoke echoes when we discuss other countries in Eastern Europe tomorrow. The Italian case, and I'm not making the case here that is anything like wonderful, is more interesting because we have now had, and I have to explain to you because I don't think you would even know about it, this whole debate. Yes, the Holocaust took place, the racial laws were criminal, the Jews of Italy, how could we remove them from us? But then you must also take into account le foibe. The foibe are natural crevices that exist just about everywhere in Dalmatia, Dalmatia being the triangle next to Italy, which used to be Italy, but was also heavily Slav, and where in 1943, Tito's partisans, in retaliation against not the Italian fascist cruelties, but also in their own resistant fight for the Slavic future Yugoslavia, a continuation of Yugoslavia, literally shot and killed thousands of Italians. When you bear in mind that there were 4,500 or 5,000 dead Italian Jews at Auschwitz, coming back from the camps, and you hear about the thousands of Italians that were dumped into these crevices, echoes of today further east, you can see that they'll say, look, we have repented, they did it, we didn't do it, but we did the racial laws, but now you must take into account our suffering as anti-communists and the partisans. Imagine that in the struggle for memory, you have had since everybody else in Europe, the January 27th, Giornata della Memoria, the Day of Remembrance for Auschwitz. Now, 13 days later, the Italians have created La Giornata del Ricordo, which means the Day of the Souvenir, in which the massacre of civilians in the Foibe is commemorated at the national level. This happened on February 10th. I must admit that I wasn't even looking. I was counting tanks at the border with Ukraine, and so I had to check it up later. But in this pomp and circumstance, the president of Italy, the prime minister of Italy, Mario Draghi, and the entire Senate were convened to say this was a horrible moment of tragedy for the nation of the Italians, those who died and those who were expelled from Dalmatia. But we will no longer try to make a point of doing irredentism. What counts now is that we're going to create a new Europe, and we're creating commissions with the Slovenes, with the Croats, to discover what really happened in what are these horrible gorges in which you had layers, partisans, fascists, not unlike the famous controversy over the Ausstellung in Berlin in the early 90s when they had confused NKVD cadavers, Jews, and whatever, and the whole thing had to be closed down. Mario Draghi said, we don't want to have this kind of thing. We want to have a national reconciliation. We have the Jewish moment. Now we can have the Italian civic moment. It happened just on February 10th, which is the National Day, 13 days after the Holocaust. So is this, if his vision holds true, is this the beginning of a national reconciliation in which those of the right and who were anti-communist, believed that the communists were monsters, that Stalin was going to roll over the country? Is this the beginning of a reconciliation? Are we also at a point in which many of the extreme right groups, certainly in part La Meloni, but others, have received money from Russia, but we can turn it around, and all of a sudden they'll say, look, we were right. Look at what the Russians are doing to the Ukrainians. This is exactly what we feared, and you in the resistance as left-wing, you also played a role in hitchhiking the memory. So let us get off this hitchhiking. Let's each pay our own tickets and take a bus together and go toward national reconciliation. In France, I'm not sure the bus is waiting, and I am not sure at all that people will want to board the bus. I don't know about Italy, because there can be a moment in which everybody's dead. Not the victims, of course the victims, but also the Communist Party, the socialists not doing so well, Tito is dead, the partisans are dead, and you're left with a kind of new discourse of civil society and the victims, whatever color they may have. Jews on one end, poor Italians that were forced to leave millennial livings in Dalmatia. And will something come out of this? In other words, make that right wing more palatable? I don't know. But it's a question that has to be asked, because what is being asked in France and in Italy, with this gray zone that used to be already gray back then, and is gray now again, is it going to move forward, or are we still stuck in the same discourse? And I don't know. And my guess, my moment here has been to try to convey to you the gray. In positive sense, it's the beauty of Hammershøi's paintings as the great Danish painter of the gray interiors. In an Italian Jewish sense, I go back to the great Primo Levi and his whole understanding of the grayness and the concept of grayness among Jews, with the torturers, with the perpetrators, the bystanders, and the others. And I guess I am a child of Primo Levi. Thank you.